The birth and death of ISIS. The world is finally able to sigh in relief as that horror that was ISIS has finally come to its near end. We remember not too long ago in the past when all we could hear of every day was these horrific bombings all over the world and ISIS declaring responsibility for them. We had the bombings in Brussels at the airport where 350 people died. We had bombings in Africa. We had Boko Haram, the Nigerian terrorist group which pledged allegiance to the Islamic State and was getting advanced training, weapons, and money from the Islamic State to continue to perpetrate its terror on Nigeria. We had Libya, where crisis took over Libya, and ISIS fighters killed some Coptic Christians, about 30 Coptic Christians, beheaded them at the beach. It was a horrific, scary period when we thought all hope was lost, and this rare radical breed of Islamic radicalism or Islamist radicalism was going to take over the world. Now, to the origins of ISIS. There are reports of a conceived plan to balkanize the Middle East, dividing Iraq into Sunnistan, Kurdistan, Shiastan. The apparent role of Western meddling and premeditated foreign hatching of plots that carried the Middle East through this blood-soaked divisive course cannot be overemphasized. Former U.S. Senator Dr. Ron Paul gives an excellent summary of the methods and results of U.S. meddling across the world.
And so we definitely have a moral responsibility, and especially now today, the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds essentially are being used for this. But there's a political liability which I think is something that we fail to look at because too often there's so much blowback from our intervention in areas that we shouldn't be involved in. You know, Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first, indirectly and directly through Israel, help establish Hamas. Then we have an election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. You know, it just doesn't make sense. During the 80s, you know, we were allied with Osama bin Laden. And we were contending with the Soviets. It was at that time our CIA thought it was good if we radicalized the Muslim world. So we financed the madrasa schools to radicalize the Muslims in order to compete with the Soviets. There's too much blowback. There's a lot of reasons why we should oppose this resolution. It is not in the interest of the United States. It's not in the interest of Israel either.
Ibrahim Awad al-Badri, better known as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, came in contact with U.S. intelligence officials in February of 2004 when he was arrested and allegedly imprisoned in Abu Ghraib and Baqqa prison in Iraq. Here, mingling with fellow radicals, he was said to become an organizer and boss in prison. A U.S. review board decided to free him unconditionally in December that year, and he joined up with radicals in Iraq to pioneer the developing ISIS or Islamic State in Syria and the Levant. It is important to notice that unlike the majority of us, it's common to find radical terrorists having had unusual interactions with U.S. intelligence officials, usually through arrests. Now let's rewind a little to the 2012 ending Benghazi attacks. When Ambassador Stevens was killed, there was a sudden deadly attack on U.S. facilities in Libya. We recollect Hillary Clinton spinning a tale that this attack that killed Ambassador Stevens was a crazy Muslim response to a sensitive movie. Muslims were made to look ugly as the Obama-Hillary administration invariably promoted actual riots across the Muslim world to cover for the real events in Libya. We, however, know that protesters are not assassins and protests do not get ambassadors killed. The truth later came out that Hillary lied. She knew from the first minute that the Benghazi attack was coordinated to kill the US ambassador and other US agents. She told the Egyptian Prime Minister in a phone call the next morning, and I quote, "We knew the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest." Reports revealed Ambassador Stevens was kept in dangerous Iraq on a gun-running mission. He was used to arm Libyan radicals and was shipping post-Gaddafi arsenal to arm radicals in Syria. There are many more reports on how US weapons were supplied to arm so-called moderate rebels and ultimately ISIS. One of the worst was when Mosul fell to just 800 radical terrorists, and the Obama administration watched as ISIS captured 2,500 top-quality Humvees. Imagine Drone Commander Obama, who typically uses drones to drop bombs all over Yemen and anywhere else, refused to bomb these Humvees and allowed ISIS capture, keep, and use them to rain terror on Iraq and Syria. So ISIS has arms and a powerful, charismatic leader, Abu Bakr Baghdadi. The glaring question is, why will the Obama administration enable such a formation, and who was behind the development of ISIS? An article in Financial Times answers that question. I quote, "After the Iraq city of Mosul fell to a lightning ISIS offensive in 2014, even the late Prince Saud al-Faisal, the respected Saudi foreign minister, remonstrated with John Kerry, U.S. Secretary of State, that Daesh, ISIS, better known as Daesh, is our Sunni response to your support for the Dawa, the Tehran-aligned Shia Islamist ruling party of Iraq." End quote. The Saud's plan was for ISIS to counter the Shia majority democratic rule of post-Saddam Iraq. The Wahhabi sect Saudis were angry about a Shia-ruled Iraq. ISIS would also help them attack their other mortal enemy, the Shia-ish Assad of Syria. According to declassified U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency documents dated August 2012, quote, "The Pentagon foresaw the likely rise of the Islamic State as a direct consequence of the strategy, but described this outcome as a strategic opportunity to isolate the Syrian regime." So ISIS was going to serve a function in the interest of Saudi Arabia and the United States against the Shia-ruled Iraq, post-Saddam, and the sort of Shia-ish Assad of Syria. So now we have a deadly radical Sunni sect ideological ISIS being aided directly or indirectly by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the United States, gaining grounds in Iraq and Syria. However, as hard as they tried, they could not topple Assad and suffered continually in his hands with help from Iran and Russia. As the war dragged on, there was clamor to grab a victory. To do so, Assad would need to be bombed. It is important to mention at this juncture that while the rebellion in Syria, as with Libya, appeared to be a result of protests, as we noted earlier, protesters do not turn into militia like the Free Syrian Army unless they are armed, trained, and financed by an organized body of foreign country. Next, the chemical attacks happened which the Syrian government denied. Obama declared a red line had been crossed and he prepared to bomb Assad. The game plan was not so clear to some. At this point, I bring up an article I wrote that hot September 2013 as the world was on the brink of World War III. The title of the article was Obama's Syria Endgame, New Al-Qaeda Recruits Dispatched to Syria. It was published in globalresearch.ca. I quote, "It is important we read this piece from Israeli-born journalist Yusuf Bodansky via the same globalresearch.ca. Referenced yesterday by one of US top radio hosts, Rush Limbaugh." And I quote a little bit from the article by Yusuf. "On August 13 to 14, 2013, Western-sponsored opposition forces in Turkey started advanced preparations for a major and irregular military surge." On to the end. "An imminent escalation in the fighting due to a war-changing development which would in turn lead to a US-led bombing of Syria." So the US bombing of Syria was predicted by this article. Now, quoting further from my piece, "On August 8th, it was reported that Saudi rulers urgently tried to bribe and threaten Russia to abandon Syria. The offer was humongous, over $15 billion in deals, as well as a promise come threat to enable a safe Winter Olympics in Russia as they, the Saudis, quote, control the Chechen rebels or terrorists. There was also deals to help Russia with its gas pipeline and so many things that the Saudis promised the Russians. Russia rejected the offer and stood by its ally and Middle East interest." But to appreciate what's really going on, we need to go back to July of 2013. Freeing all Al-Qaeda operatives, the coordinated Iraq, Libya, and Pakistan prison breaks. On July 23rd, an Al-Qaeda group attacked 2 Iraqi prisons and successfully freed more than 500 inmates. On Saturday, July 26th, in Benghazi, Libya, another prison break happened and 1,200 of Libya's most deadly inmates escaped. Midnight, July 29th to 30th, same thing happened in Afghanistan, in Pakistan province. Over 300 inmates were released. All these Al-Qaeda legions from hell were going to strike in Syria. And this, my article, was the first article to expose this event. So these 2,000 legions were stationed in Turkey, and ISIS controlled parts of Syria, ready to move in on Damascus once Obama bombed Assad. This would be similar to how 50,000 Western and Arab Air Force sorties paved a path for Benghazi rebels to creep to Tripoli over a long 6 months. We recollect that the world rejected Obama's bombing of Syria. World War III was feared as Russia and China sent warships to Syria. US troops protested and said they did not sign up for this. Even the Pope intervened. In the UK, British Prime Minister Cameron failed to get support of Parliament, and finally Obama succumbed. We recollect that during US congressional debates, when funding was raised, the Saudis boldly offered to finance the aerial attack on Assad. Following this, ISIS began to strike US personnel in Iraq. They were clearly frustrated and pissed that the US did not fulfill its side of the deal. Additionally, with 2,000 of the worst in Syria and Iraq, ISIS became the most horrible monster and menace to the world. Daesh, as ISIS is called, was making good money. The terror organization used to make $3 million daily from open sales of oil. It controlled Iraq refineries under the watch of the Obama administration and used to openly drive thousands of tankers of oil to sell in Turkey daily. Obama refused to interfere with and bomb these channels of finance. Russia laid the accusations against Turkey out bare. I couldn't take it. In August of 2014, I wrote an article captioned, "Why is Obama soft on ISIS?" I called the US president out. ISIS was the worst nightmare for the world in general and Muslims in particular. Developing tentacles across the world, it spelled doom in capital letters. Enter Russia. Apparently unable to take it anymore, Putin decided to act, and act he did. Russia bombed thousands of tankers involved in the oil trade financing ISIS. The rest is history. Russia continued determined attacks on ISIS targets across Syria and Iraq. The Obama administration kept squealing that Russia was not striking ISIS, as Republican candidate Trump spurred Russia on and raised issue of how the Obama administration was responsible for the arming of ISIS. As the US presidential elections approached, Obama was forced to act at last and join the assault on ISIS. Enter Trump, and it was all over for the terrorist organization. Trump immediately shared intelligence with Russia and collaborated to decimate the monsters. The truth is, no terrorist can exist and thrive as ISIS did without government support and tolerance. We thank God ISIS is dead. We look forward to deradicalization of Wahhabi ideological Saudi Arabia, which influence continues to inspire and finance radicalism worldwide. Saudi has reportedly spent $100 billion to promote its fanatical brand of radical Islam around the world. The effect felt in Nigeria has been related to Boko Haram terror and radical ideology-inspired government massacres and secret mass burial of as many as 1,000 Shia Muslims in late 2015 by the Buhari administration. New U.S. efforts under Trump promise to address this remnant of the root cause of ISIS, Boko Haram, and radical Islam worldwide.
The deal with Saudi Arabia, and I couldn't get an answer on specifically how we were monitoring their support, their continued support of the exportation of Wahhabism, Salafism, and the terror that goes along with that fundamentalist view of Islam around the globe. Do you know of any metrics that the department is following to support their claim that they are working on that? How are we gauging that? How are we going to determine whether they're following along with that portion of the agreement?
Well, one of the outcomes of the President's summit in Riyadh was the creation of the Center to counter extreme Muslim messaging with Saudi Arabia. This center now exists. It was inaugurated while we were there. The center has a number of elements to attack extremism around the world. One of the elements that we are visiting with them about, and they have already taken steps, the Saudis, is to publish new textbooks that go into the schools that are in the mosque around the world. These textbooks are to replace textbooks that are out there today that do advocate extreme Wahhabism viewpoints around the justification for violence. We've asked that they not just publish the new textbooks, we've asked that they retrieve the existing textbooks so we get those back. That's just one example. This center is going to have a very broad range from social media to broadcast to how young imams are trained in the theological centers. And we are working with them today with the establishment of the new center. What are the measures that we will hold ourselves accountable to? That is one of the charges that the State Department is working with the Saudis and others as we bring this center up to an operating level.